Hey everybody, it's AJ Mansour. Popping in real quick before we start today's podcast to say thank you to a company within our community that is doing really good things. Cultivated CBD. You've heard us talk about them on the radio, and now they're sponsoring the Here and Now podcast. I'd like to thank them for that. This is a company that is engaged in our community and believes in making our community a better place for everybody. So I encourage you now, check out cultivatedcbd.com. We have a special promo code KFAN. You can insert that promo code at the checkout and get 10% off all the CBD products, 10% off with that promo code KFAN at checkout. We got fruit de pate gummies, the tincture oils, the spearmint flavor is my favorite, and then the new CBD salve, the heating and cooling balm that you can put on your sore muscles after you work out in the summer, after you're working in the yard, whatever it might be. Big time thanks to Cultivated CBD. You'll see that promo code down in this little ticker. It'll run throughout the podcast on this video, and head over cultivatedcbd.com. Anthony and the gang, thank you so much for your belief in this podcast and the important messages in our community to just make it a better place. So thank you, Cultivated CBD. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Here and Now podcast, where we hold conversations on race and racial equality within our city. Admission to start this podcast off. I deleted an episode, and I'm ashamed. I've spent the last week trying to recover it and was unable to do it. We had a wonderful conversation with Minnesota Wild player J.T. Brown about his advocacy in our community, and I deleted it. So shame on me. So this week I'm going to dive back into the well with a wonderful conversation from the Here on Earth podcast that is with Principal Mari Friestleben. She is the principal at North Minneapolis High School, formerly Lucy Laney Elementary School. There's a documentary on her that the good folks at Care 11 put together called Love Them First. Wonderful documentary. I encourage you to check it out. She has been doing amazing things with the future, the young kids, and now the high schoolers in this community. And now that this community has suffered some unrest and some danger and some violence, this has taken a new turn for her. I'm hoping to get her on for another interview, a follow-up interview under the current circumstances of our city. But this interview is from last fall, an opportunity to chat with her about her shift to the high school, her opportunity to deal with a little bit of a different age group, but also have a giant impact on the children of Minneapolis, specifically North Minneapolis. We did touch on some of the racial disparities in our communities, in our schools, in the school system of Minneapolis. Very interesting conversation. She's an amazing woman. I encourage you to check it out. Check out that documentary. But for the time being, this week's episode of the Here and Now podcast is with Principal of North Minneapolis High School, Mari Friestleben.
I often tell people I've always been in Minneapolis public schools. I don't really know anything different. I started kindergarten when I was 4 years old. I went to the old Jenny Lind and Jordan schools here in North Minneapolis, the old Lincoln, and then graduated from Washburn High School. Went and got my undergrad at the University of St. Thomas. Really had no plans or intentions on being a teacher. I majored in journalism and sociology, and I was just going to, spread truth to the world. I was going to be the next Barbara Walters. I was going to cover guerrilla warfare in Guatemala. I was going to do all these, dangerous and courageous stories and events and tell people kind of what was really going on. I got really early on in my undergrad, I got a coveted Associated Press internship in the Atlanta Bureau, and then at the same time I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, my oldest daughter. And so I was like, all right, plan B. And education just kind of found me at that point. When I went into teaching, I taught middle school English. And yet I kind of had various opportunities. I had people pulling me in different directions. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I also wanted to defer my student loans, and so I kept finding ways to go back to school. And that's where I ended up kind of with this leadership track. when I went down the leadership track, I ended up still serving in the middle school environment and middle school atmosphere. And I was approached by a private Christian school here in the Twin Cities area around the principalship for their secondary program. And it was really exciting to think about. I don't know that I'm a cookie cutter poster child for like a traditional faith. When people say, well, you know, what type of denomination, I often just say like the church I attend is a non-denominational church, but I just feel most comfortable saying that my faith is really strong and my faith is rooted in the Bible, like period, end of story, Genesis to Revelation. And I don't know that I fit kind of a good category of religion, I guess I would say. So I was being approached and I decided to go through the interview process for this private Christian school. And it was very exciting for me to think about, because I kept thinking about, wow, like how cool would that be to just be super open about your faith, especially with working with adolescents, you know, to just pull them aside and say like, God did not bring you here for this purpose that you're walking through in your life, or to pull somebody aside and say, our faith does not tell us that we should engage or think about ourselves in this way, or to like pray with a parent. Because a lot of times by the time a situation gets to the principal's office, it's pretty intense, and you can have parents that are in distress, and there would be a freedom there in a faith-based educational institution to say, like, do you want me to pray with you, for you? And so I thought, wow, this was really interesting. And so I got all the way down. I was one of two finalists, and then I got the offer. And at the same time I got the offer for that school, I was told that I was being reassigned to the assistant principalship at Lucy Laney. I didn't know a lot about Lucy Laney at the time. It didn't have a good reputation, to be quite honest. But when I looked at the address, what really struck me about the address is that it was in close proximity to, and if you've watched the film, it was in close proximity to a childhood home that I lived in, that was in a neighborhood that had a lot of bad memories for me. And I wasn't interested in being in that area. And even being on the north side, I taught on the north side. I felt very comfortable on the north side, except for right in that area. I used to drive around the area rather than drive straight through if I had to get from one side to another, because I didn't want to be there. I knew what I'd experienced in that home that was right there, but I didn't want to drive by it. And so I thought, that is kind of crazy that would be the location for my reassignment. My great-grandmother was 102, and she was dying. And so I said I needed a minute to make my decision. Obviously, I didn't say anything to Minneapolis Public Schools because I'd gotten the reassignment. Either I was going to take it or I wasn't. But I did say to the private Christian school that I needed to get back with them. We had a family situation out of town. And so my great-uncle arrived from the East Coast, and we were sitting outside of my grandmother's room. And she was dying, and we were basically just kind of holding vigil for her. And we had nothing else to do, so I was telling him about this decision that I had to make. And he just has a lot of wisdom. And he looked at me and he said, we're called to be salt and light. If you go to that Christian school, it would be easy, but you weren't called to go anywhere easy. And so that was it. That my decision was made. It was just confirmation to maybe what I was already leaning toward. And I I declined the job offer to that secondary program, and I went ahead and started making arrangements to move over to Lucy Laney. So I think when it comes to this position here, it's similar. I was at Laney for 10 years, and it was really hard in the beginning. It was still hard, but in different ways. In the beginning, you're trying to build trust and credibility, especially if and when you're in an institution or an organization that doesn't have it. And so I would say the first 5 years were like almost every day I was like, what am I doing? This isn't working. I'm not getting anywhere. And then the last 5 years were like, wow, you're actually seeing fruit. And it felt really good. And so when this position opened, I thought to myself, I don't know that I want to start all over again. But again, this is what I was called to do. Not go to the easy places, but go to the hard places.
It was those hard places that presented Principal Friestleben with hard situations. But instead of following the mold and doing what so many others might have done, she adapted. She changed her mindset and her view towards these students, towards the school, and towards the task at hand. With the adaptability on the forefront, doors were opened for new relationships, new tactics, and newfound success right there within the walls of Lucy Laney Elementary.
I will say that when I first got to Lucy Laney, I was really struck by the demographics because the school sits at 3333 Penn Avenue North. And if you kind of look at a 1 mile radius, it's a very ethnically and racially and linguistically and even economically diverse area. And yet when I walked into the school, I noticed that the student body was almost 100% poverty and almost all African American. And I thought that how did this this is really bizarre. It had a really high homeless and high mobility rate. About 1 out of 4 of the kids were homeless, and about 1 out of 3 of the kids had a documented disability. And so I spent the first couple of years really wrestling with, how are we okay with this as a society? How are we okay with this as a city? I was just on this really broad scale, kind of unpacking and unlayering, and I started to try and understand more about how school choice plays into school segregation and why there's families that live right across the street, but they get on a bus and go so far away. And is it because most of my kids are Black? Is it because, right? So I'm just going through all this in my mind. And I was at a community meeting and I was kind of expressing this. And an elder in the community pulled me aside afterwards. And he said, Mari, it doesn't sound like you want the kids you have. And I was like, he's kind of right. He's kind of right. I had to step outside of myself a little bit and think about how I was sounding. And I think that that's when I started to flip in my mind. And I think that's where kind of the love them first mentality started to come out. I'm really not going to be worried. Socially, we're in a mess. And you can look at it from all different types of perspectives and just get super discouraged and think well, God, just come and rescue us. But I'm going to change my locus of control, and what I have influence over is the students that get off this bus every morning and come into these doors. So my perspective or my approach began, what do my kids need? So if you are homeless, what do you need? Not how can I decrease my number of students that are homeless? I can't. Not how can I increase housing stability? I can't. But over this child right here, I can influence his or her school experience. Or how can I create an atmosphere for students that are in foster care? And then also, how do I create an atmosphere for students that are not? Students that are like really happy-go-lucky, two-parent, middle class income, so that they're not coming to school and being exposed to some sort of trauma or conflict that's now traumatizing them, right? So I started to change my mindset and my approach and create an atmosphere that was going to be best for the students that were in front of me. I think one thing that's really important to me about people who watch the film, and this is how I feel I was as a teacher, how I feel I am as a principal, whether it's at Lucy Laney or here at North High, high standards and high expectations are extremely important to me. When I talk about like loving kids where they're at, I feel like it's kind of maybe similar to what we would do with our own biological children, right? Like I know you can do better. Like, you're my child. You can do better. I have high expectations for you. Like, you are going to be whatever, right? That we have in our minds for our own children. And that's what I try to do with the students that I have in front of me.
And in the short term, those challenges presented were not necessarily accepted by everyone in the wings of the school or the community. This caused a obvious transition period to occur, both with the staff and the students in the early years.
A lot of people left me.
Yeah.
I felt really bad actually in the beginning, because it was just a place of high turnover. There was one year where we counted 17 staff left before the school year was even over. I mean, from the number of staff that started in fall, 17 of them left by the end of that school year. And it was hard because it felt personal. And they would all say, like, it's not personal, Mari. It's just, this is really hard. Like, this is really hard. You have to be, if you decide to step into this kind of work, you have to be extremely grounded and rooted yourself. One of the things that we had a resident, she's actually in the film a little bit, but she works at the University of Minnesota, and her name is Ann Garrity, and she focuses on childhood trauma and other adverse childhood experiences that can impact children. And what she would talk to me a lot about is, first of all, children have an innate desire to want what they want, right? And that's where, you see that kid, that's your kid that throws a temper tantrum, right? Like your kid. And that actually, your kid should be able to figure out how to throw a temper tantrum at home with you, right? Because that should be kind of their safe place. Some kids who have experienced, some sort of traumatic or difficult childhood experiences don't have that place is not safe. That home environment is not a safe place to throw a temper tantrum, but it's still inside of them. And so where do they do it? They might do it in the classroom, or they might do it in the hallway, and so she was walking us through kind of all these things. And then, but how do you do that in a way where I'm going to let you throw this temper tantrum, but you're going to have to throw it over here. You're not going to throw it publicly. So you need to go over here quietly and privately. And you go over there and stomp your feet all you want. And you've got 10 minutes, right? And how do you create that environment and then push it out to the rest of the adults around you, so that, like, you as one person aren't the only person trying to replicate this mentality? And there were a lot of staff that just said, I don't have the mindset to do that. Either it's triggering my own emotions, either I don't feel like I have the patience for that, or I don't have the presence of mind to manage that. And it was hard, because I felt like, what am I going to do, God? What am I going to do without an army? I need an army. But for every person that left, there was a really strong person waiting in the wings to take their spot. And even though it was hard to say goodbye to some people, it felt really good to say hello to other people who were ready. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was a peaceful decision for me to move from Lucy Laney to North High, because they're so strong. They can stand on their own 2 feet right now. They don't need me there saying, that one might need a minute. Tell them they have 5 minutes and come back, because they know that now.
It was through this adversity, though, that a new slogan was born for Mari. It became a mantra for Principal Friestleben on the daily basis, but more importantly, it grew out of Lucy Laney Elementary School into the neighborhood, into the surrounding community, and into the lives of the students that walked through her doors.
It actually kind of started with me. I'm not the easiest employee to have. I'm very quick to question, challenge respectfully. And I was kind of thinking, it was probably a few years back now, where I was thinking, but I think I'm worth the cost. And I can't remember who I said it to, but I said it to one of my supervisors or managers or leaders or something. I said, I know that I'm not always the easiest, but I'm worth the cost, because when I leave out of here, I'm going to give everything I have to get the results that need to be gotten. And I started to think about staff in the same way. Like, sometimes I need to do more for certain people, or sometimes I need to be patient, but it's okay, because they're worth the cost. And the cost for me right now may be time or some other type of investment, but I know that I'm gonna get a return on my investment with them. And then I started to apply it in my mind to students too. Like, in some ways it's the same. Like, the investment that we're gonna sow into you right now, we're gonna get a good reward. And so I started to say it regularly. I was saying it in meetings. I was saying it in professional development with the staff. I was saying it with students, and then I just started to say it on announcements, and we started to put it on our t-shirts, and it just kind of caught fire. And I'll hear other people say it now too. I'll hear other people in Minneapolis Public Schools say it, and it's just a good reminder. Like, sometimes in this second, I may not want to invest what I want to invest, but I'm going to, because in the long run, it's going to be worth the cost.
There are a few moments in the documentary where Principal Friestleben can be seen reading her daily devotions, listening to worship music on her drive to work, seemingly filling her well so that she can better be prepared to overflow the love of the Lord onto the students that she encounters each and every day.
Well, the scene in the documentary was my morning time, actually. And I slack off on the weekends. I'm not an angel. But I am very fearful of walking into the work without having been fed by my word and covered in prayer. That's something that, my mom told me once that there's so many references to, like, the fear of God, and those who fear God are a friend of God, and that's a really hard concept for us to understand. But she said it's more like a reverence, like almost kind of like an intimidated respect, and that definitely shows up for me in my work, and I don't shy away from it at all. I remember, we were really young. It's a stupid analogy, but I'm just going to give it to you. And one of my best girlfriends was getting married, and we were all like, "You're so young, and how do you know that this guy is going to be good?" And he was a little older than her, and she said, "He's so afraid of God. Like, he has such a fear of God that, like, I feel so safe with him." And that always stuck out to me, because it had nothing to do with their relationship at all. It just had to do with the way she looked towards him. And she knew that his respect for God, or fear of God, and that he needed to be a man that found favor with God, would influence their marriage. And they're still married to this day and very happy. And so I kind of apply that similar mentality to my work. I am afraid to leave out of my house and not have spent time on my knees to come into this work. I read, so I think I'm on my 9th time through my word. And the devotional that I read in the morning it's a little bit of Old Testament, a little bit of New, a little bit of Psalms, and a little bit of Proverbs. And it's kind of one of those, like, by date, and I'm never on the right date ever.
Catch up.
I'm always, but I just keep going through, and then I just really try to connect with whatever it is I'm reading, and pray that over my mindset, over the staff, over the parents, the community, and obviously the students, and then filling my spirit with praise and worship. A lot of times I'll just be listening to the same song over and over again. And the pastor of my church said one time, like, if you have a song in your spirit, let it be on repeat. Let it be on repeat until it's not there anymore, because that just means that there's something happening. There's something happening, and just sit with it. So that song that's in the movie is really interesting because I was a single mom. I had 2 daughters, and then I met my husband at work. He was the inspector of the 4th precinct for Minneapolis Police Department. And he came through. We had a situation down the street from Lucy Laney, and he came through, and I had never met him, and he had never met me. But then he kept coming back to the school, and like all the teachers were like, ooh. And I was like, what? And everybody kept saying, we've never had this type of police presence. And I was like, you know what? You're right. We actually have never had this level of police presence. But we fell in love, and we got married, and all moved pretty quickly. And a lady from my church had that song on her spirit for me, the New Wine song. And it was just on repeat. And so the KARE 11 reporters wanted to ride to work with me. And I said, well, this is what's on. And not only was it on there, but it was on all the time. It was on in my office. And so I think they felt like they had to include that in some way. In fact, originally, they had a hard time getting it released from Hillsong. And I think they actually spent some money to use the portion of it that they did. But I'm really glad they did, because it speaks to my mindset at the time. As far as being in a public space or a public place, I don't know how to explain it other than it just must be the covering of the Holy Spirit, because even as a teacher, I never came out and said, oh, here's my faith, or here's what I believe. But I would oftentimes have students be like, do you go to church? Like, do you? And I wasn't playing like praise and worship in my classroom and stuff. But they would ask, and I think that's how maybe we are supposed to be. I think maybe we're supposed to stand out. The word says that we're in the world but not of it, and so it makes me think if that's noticeable to people, like that you're here but you're not like of here, and so they ask, and people still ask a lot of times, especially with getting the success that we were getting at Lucy Laney. When people would ask me, what drives your work, I would just say my faith. My faith drives my work. But I've never been the type of person that has come out, and I'm not carrying billboards or sandwich boards that say John 3:16 on them. I'm just doing what I'm doing, and I'm working hard. And when people ask what my motivating factor is, that's what they find out.
Part of those daily blessings for Principal Friestleben have included relationships that have grown from inside the walls of the school and flourished on the outside. While her daily time with the Lord clearly helps her well run full, it's a special view on her marriage and her relationship with her husband that picks her back up when she, just like the rest of us, gets knocked down. It's that relationship that truly opened her eyes to the love that the Father has for us.
I was a single mom, and just, my parents weren't married. My grandparents got divorced on both sides. I didn't have a good concept of marriage. I didn't have a good concept of self-worth. I didn't know how to demand better personally. I knew how to engage professionally, but I didn't know how to engage personally. And so here I was with one daughter, and then with another daughter, and I knew enough not to expose them to the unhealthy relationships that I was in, and so I was just single most of the time. And before I met my husband and got married, I was in a dry place. I really was. I was still in my word, and I was still in my prayer life was still strong, but I was just kind of going through the motions, and I was really relying on God to fill me up, and He was filling me up, and there was no part of me that thought, ooh, I need to get married. That did not come into my mind at all. But I feel like when my husband started to love me, all of a sudden, like, I had more to give. Like, it was like that idea of like your cup running over. That's how I felt. Like, all of a sudden I felt like my cup is running over. I had never felt what I believe God intended for a husband and wife to feel before, like, that I'm here for you. Like, I will do anything for you. I had never felt that before, ever. And it gave me just like new energy to say, like, I can do this, because I know that, like, when I get home, like, there'll be somebody there who will tell me all about the stupid baseball stats from the day that I don't care about, but it's because, like, he's excited to see me and talk to me, and, like, I'm his person and he's my person. I for the first time understood the analogy of, like, Christ and the church as, like, the bride and the groom. Like, I understood it for the first time, because, and I know it's not politically correct and everything, but, like, I realized, like, this man would give up his life for me. I'd never felt that kind of love before, ever. And it just gave me what I needed to keep going and doing what I needed to do on this end. I try to tell people, like, I think we have to be really careful, like, as people of faith. All the work that we do isn't necessarily mission field work, you know? I mean, some of it could be comparable, but it's not necessarily mission field work on paper. But just trying to stay strong and godly in this very ungodly world is really hard. And so without that, like, home base, I was running out of energy of doing it.
The transition from elementary to high school is sort of a starting over for Principal Friestleben, but her mentality to face new challenges head on comes from the same place. A heart full of love for North Minneapolis, for children, for young adults who are largely misunderstood. And it's that mentality that she hopes spreads beyond the walls of her school, beyond the borders of Minneapolis, and spreads like wildfire throughout our city, our state, and very much so our world today.
Well, I think there's a few different ways to look at it. So one is from a faith perspective. And so I think for people who do claim to be people of faith, and people who claim to live their life in a biblical way, I think biblically we are very clearly directed to have compassion, to weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. I think especially children. You know, the even the way that our Savior talks about children, you know, whomever would harm the least of these. And so that's how I think about children. When I, from more of like a societal perspective, when I hear kind of the negativity towards children, especially children of color and or children who live in poverty, one thing that strikes me is there's a lot of adults who put onto children the issues they have with adults. And it's disturbing, because what I see is a cycle. So I see a broader society that maybe has issues with adults of color or adults in poverty. Valid or invalid, okay? Then they use that to kind of abdicate or absolve themselves of their responsibility to those children. Well, I don't know why they have that many kids. I don't know why they just don't go to an employment agency. I don't know why, right? One thing after another. And so what I see is you get that societal perspective about the adults. You project it onto the children who didn't ask to be in those situations. No different than your children asked to be born to you and your wife. These children didn't ask to be born into their situations, but they feel that. They feel that judgment, that unfair judgment that is on their parents' and grandparents' shoulders. I would argue sometimes unfairly too, and is now being put onto them. One time, somebody told me, when I was a teenager, I really struggled with what had happened to me when I was little. And I didn't want to have anything to do with church. And I babysat for this family, and the couple were really involved in their church. And it was late one night, and they were kind of challenging me a little bit on my lack of faith, my lack of interest in church. And so I told them, what happened. And I said, I'm really having a hard time understanding what kind of God would allow that to happen. And rather than saying what I wish they would have said, which is something that Jesus said once when the disciples asked him about, why was this man born blind? And Jesus said, it's for God's greater glory. They said, sometimes the sins of the father are passed on to generations. And I said, so you mean because my parents or my grandparents sinned, I paid the price for that? And they said, yes. I never forgot that, ever. And I reject that, because there are plenty of places in the Word where it says that's no longer true. The children are not being held accountable for their parents' and grandparents' mistakes. So for me, what I would say is, whether it's people of faith or whether it's people who are just socially active or aware, don't do that to children. They receive that, they absorb it, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They sense the way this society looks at them. They're not stupid. They have their eyes and ears wide open, and it becomes a point of contention. They become angry, and they say, well, if you're going to expect that of me anyway, okay, I might as well be what you think I am. And I want to disrupt that.
What an amazing opportunity to chat with Principal Mari Friestleben. A real-life superhero. I know that we kind of throw that term around loosely towards athletes because they're good at their sport, towards actors because they're famous, and we respect what they do. But when you see people like Principal Friestleben, I don't know that there is a truer definition of the word superhero. Somebody who's impacting future generations, who's changing the culture and maybe the mentality towards the culture right here in Minneapolis. This is happening in our city. These sorts of mentalities that are portrayed in the documentary Love Them First are happening right here in our backyard, in our city, to kids, not adults, to kids. And she is impacting those kids on a daily basis. Now those young adults at North Minneapolis High School. A true real-life superhero that would, I'm sure, love encouragement. and days inside the walls of schools in general are tough, and they're long, and they're trying. And if you would find it in your day, find some time, 5 minutes, to either shoot her an email. You can get her email on the high school, North High School website, to shoot her a word of encouragement, to write a letter, send it over to the high school, write her a letter. But more importantly, just to pray, to lift her up in prayer, lift up her students, lift up her staff, lift up her school, North High School, and Lucy Laney, and the rest of Minneapolis, just in general. Those kids need to be covered in prayer, and we have an opportunity to do that. So take time out of your day. Take a couple minutes to pray for Principal Friestleben, to pray for the staff, to pray for those schools, and to pray for those students. The impact and the power of prayer. I had a cool opportunity. I got to pray with Principal Friestleben after this and say some of these words that my heart was begging to say, and the Lord was hopefully putting on my tongue to share and to anoint over Principal Friestleben. It was a cool opportunity, a really cool opportunity, and you can do that now. You can smother those schools, our city, our state in prayer right now. So if you have time, please do that. Encourage her staff, and remember those students. And remember all students, whether you're suburban, whether you're in the cities, wherever your kids are, wherever you reside, Pray for those kids who are impacted on a daily basis by many, many negative forces. Satan has infiltrated the walls of those schools. There's no doubt about it. There are things happening there that are beyond the supervision of adults, that are beyond, even in the supervision of adults, aren't necessarily loving upon our kids. And as my kids get older and head into elementary schools, and as your kids grow older or are adults and have impact on young kids going forward, that's where the prayer is needed. So lift up Principal Friestleben, lift up those schools, lift up all schools and the future generations of children that we have that will be impacted by these sorts of things. Special thanks to Principal Friestleben for taking time out of her day to have this conversation with us. We're going to continue these conversations for season number 2. This is just the beginning. There's already some that are recorded that will be shared probably on an every other week basis. But as we get going, who knows? Maybe there'll be more often. Maybe we'll just be flooded with good content and be able to pump them out as quick as they come in. But as always, we appreciate you listening, spending this time to hear this story. We appreciate your support through prayer, through following and sharing this podcast. If you know a teacher, if you know a principal, anyone working in a school who could hear this message and be impacted by it, I encourage you to share it with them. Send it to them on Facebook. Send it to them on Twitter. Send them an email with a link to this, not necessarily so we get the listens, but so that Mari's message can be shared and the impact that she has can be shared. It can be praised, but it can also be emulated. A lot of these ideas can be emulated in schools, in classrooms, in workplaces, wherever you work, whether you work in a business or an elementary school, it doesn't matter. Some of these things can be enacted in your place of work. So share this message, share this story. And again, we appreciate you just listening to this podcast. That's what we get out of it. I love hearing feedback from on Twitter about these stories. It's so much fun and encouraging to know that these messages are being shared in a way that is impacting people. So let's continue to do that. I'm going to do that. I hope that you can find time to do that as well. And I hope you can find time to join us next week or next 2 weeks, whatever it is, on the Here on Earth podcast. I appreciate you being here, and we'll be back next week, next episode, I guess I should say, with a story of an athlete here in the Twin Cities. His name is Britton Colquitt. He is the punter for the Minnesota Vikings. He's new to Minnesota after spending time in Cleveland and was signed on as the punter for the Minnesota Vikings. And he has an amazing story of overcoming an addiction to alcohol, transforming his life for the future generations of his family, and really the impact that he has going forward on his family, on his father, on his kids, on the people that he gets to talk to and encounter because of the cool job that he has punting for the Minnesota Vikings. So in a couple weeks, we'll be back with another episode of the Here on Earth podcast with Britton Colquitt, punter from the Minnesota Vikings. Until then, my name is AJ Mansour. You can find me on Twitter at AJKFAN, and we will talk to you in a couple weeks. Thanks for listening to the Here on Earth podcast. Hey, it's AJ back with you. One final thing, one more thing I want to share, because I want to bring light and give credit to the people who first brought this story to my attention and to the attention of so many other people. The people putting together the documentary. It's called Love Them First, Lessons from Lucy Laney Elementary. Lindsay Sievert and Ben Garvin from Care 11, locally here in the Twin Cities, are the ones that put that together. You can learn more about this documentary, including finding where you can see it, where you can stream it, where you can go to a showing at lovethemfirst.com. You can also hit them up on Twitter, simply at Love Them First. Head over to twitter.com/lovethemfirst. And you can get all the information. Reach out to them, encourage them, thank them for sharing this, and also support them in their efforts to bring attention to this situation and to bring attention to the cause of Principal Mari Friestleben and what she's doing here in North Minneapolis, right in our backyard. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.